A new boss at the head of the Fed, Jerome Powell, is leaving. It's now official. I'll talk about that in just a moment. We're also going to talk about Claude Code. Claude, which reportedly managed to unlock a Bitcoin wallet that had been inaccessible for several years. I'll explain exactly what happened. Did it really crack the wallet, or is that not quite what happened? We'll also go through it. We'll cover a lot of other stories, the IPO plans of Ledger and also Consensys, the company, the parent company of MetaMask. We're also going to talk about DeFi and Solana. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crypto Red, your channel for crypto news. Let's move straight into the news. We're going to start with the Fed. We're going to talk about Kevin Warsh. Kevin Warsh is the future head of the Federal Reserve. He had already been nominated some time ago, but there were still several administrative steps to go through. Now he has officially been confirmed by the Senate. This was expected, and it was the final necessary step. So the Senate has confirmed Kevin Warsh as the next chair of the Fed. That means Jerome Powell will no longer be in charge, and Kevin Warsh will replace him. And this is very closely watched by the crypto market because Kevin Warsh is seen as genuinely crypto friendly. He has spoken positively about Bitcoin. He also has investment in several areas connected to the crypto ecosystem. I mentioned this before, but he has exposure to Polymarket and a number of other crypto-related assets and companies. So overall, yeah, good news for crypto. Now, the big question is whether he will actually manage to bring interest rates down. There is very little chance that we suddenly see a massive shift like a 2% point cut in Fed rates overnight. The more realistic expectation is that rate cuts continue gradually, but perhaps at a faster pace than under Jerome Powell. In any case, yeah, like I said, this is clearly good news. This is what Donald Trump is hoping for, the rate cuts. But yeah, that said, we need to be careful because inflation has started to pick back up in the United States, partly because of everything happening around Iran. We have seen a sharp rise in inflation over the past few weeks. So yeah, I think the Fed will remain cautious as well. Still, this is a good development, and yeah, we'll see over the next few months how it turns out. Now let's move on to a story that sounds a little scary at first. An ex-user posted something that was then picked up by several media outlets. He said, "Oh my god, Claude Code managed to crack it. It finally solved this problem had been stuck with for years." In fact, back in 2023, he had already written a post explaining that his Bitcoin wallet had been locked for 9 years. So by now, this wallet has been inaccessible for more than 10 years. It contained 5 BTC. And now he says that thanks to Claude Code, he managed to unlock it, or in a sense, to crack it. So does that mean AI is now capable of breaking into all the Bitcoin wallets? Not exactly. What actually happened is that he had, in fact, already the passphrase, the password, and he had already in fact, he didn't know if he had the wallet needed to unlock, adapted to this passphrase. So the problem was that he no longer really knew where the wallet file was. And there were a number of technical issues around recovering and opening it properly. So he installed Claude Code on one of his old computers and let it search through the hard drive to figure out where the wallet might be located. He also gave Claude Code the password so it could test it on the wallet, troubleshoot the parts that were not working properly, use a variety of older tools, and eventually get the whole thing working again. And it worked. So yes, Claude Code did help unlock the wallet, but it worked because it had access to the encrypted wallet file, it had access to the correct password, and the remaining challenge was mostly technical. That is exactly why some people hire specialists to recover old crypto wallets. Claude Code handled the entire debugging process, working with outdated tools, dealing with very old wallet software, and managing the conversion from one wallet version to another, or one file type to another. It clearly say, like here in the image, let me convert. So yeah, he did a number of technical stuff. So clearly this can work, but yeah, it's not magical. You also have to remember that Claude Code or Codex and similar tools are systems whose intelligence runs remotely. So when you do this, the password you provide here, you are effectively sending it to Anthropic or OpenAI. And that is something you need to keep in mind. But yes, it can work. And in this case, he was able to recover nearly $400,000 thanks to all of that. It is traceable on chain. We could clearly see that the BTC had not moved for more than 10 years and then suddenly they moved. So yeah, the whole story holds together. And especially since, like I said, almost 3 years ago, he had already posted some information related to that to locked wallet. So everything seemed perfectly consistent. But AI is not able to unlock or crack truly old Bitcoin wallets out of nowhere, unless, of course, you give it the password. Now, speaking of Claude Code, and let's talk about Anthropic and OpenAI. The tokenized shares of Anthropic and OpenAI on Solana fell sharply. They dropped something like 50%. Why? Because both companies issued statements saying that people were not allowed to trade or sell shares in the private companies before they are publicly listed. And that was what was happening on Solana on different other platforms, well, was not really legal. They wouldn't, Anthropic would not recognize those share transfers. So investors got nervous. These assets were repriced lower because the risk associated with them suddenly look much higher. And yeah, honestly, it's very tempting to want exposure to companies like that. I'm the first to admit, like, I would have to get exposure to, I would have loved to get exposure to OpenAI or Anthropic a few years ago, or even a few months ago. But it is very difficult to invest in this kind of company when they are not publicly listed. You have layers of SPV, of strange stuff to invest in that product with a lot of fees. But sometimes there are interesting indirect way to gain exposure. For example, with Anthropic, you have Zoom, the company that absolutely exploded during the COVID period. Its stock price went crazy at the time. Well, Zoom invested $50 million in Anthropic a few years ago, back when Anthropic's valuation was still relatively low, around $3 to $4 billion. And that means like this stake is now worth roughly $10 billion, which is just massive. Since Zoom is publicly traded, people could, in a way, buy Zoom shares to gain indirect exposure to Anthropic, and you can still do it. Anyway, there are always opportunities in the market, but you have to go look for them, and sometimes they are not that easy to find. Now, still on the topic of stock market listing, let's go back to crypto companies. Let's go back to Consensys, the parent company of MetaMask, funded by Ethereum co-founder Joe Lubin. And let's talk about Ledger also, which needs no introduction. I'm covering both in the same news item because the story is exactly the same for both. Both companies were expected to go public this year, and both are now delaying their IPOs. According to them, market conditions simply are not good enough. In other words, we are in a bear market, and you do not launch an IPO in the middle of a bear market. They want the phase of excitement. They want renewed enthusiasm around crypto companies, so they can launch under better conditions. Circle found the right moment to go public, but for Consensys and Ledger, they are going to wait until momentum returns. Personally, I think they are probably waiting for something like BTC at $100,000 or $120,000, or for crypto to start getting more mainstream attention again, perhaps with slightly less focus on AI and trying to find the right window to launch. In fact, in any case, it should not happen immediately. Maybe the end of the year, maybe in the fall for Consensys and Ledger. We'll see. We'll see when. And now, a very big piece of news in decentralized finance and a positive one for Solana. We have a major announcement around USDE and around Ethena, the issuer of USDE. Ethena is deploying a huge amount of stablecoin liquidity on Solana. This will happen through JupiterLand, the lending and borrowing arm of Jupiter, using a dedicated instance. Bitwise, the asset manager, will be in charge of managing that specific instance. There will also be a whole looping mechanism built around it. User will be able to deposit USD, borrow USDG, Ethena's other stablecoin, and use that structure to increase activity across Solana's DeFi. The goal is very clear. It's to bring more liquidity into Solana, to grow DeFi usage, and push Solana's TVL higher. So why this partnership? Because in fact, Seraphim, the former person in charge of partnerships at Ethena, who played a major role in helping Ethena grow so quickly, now works for the Solana Foundation. He was apparently the one who helped build the bridge between Ethena and Solana to attract that liquidity and bring more TVL onto the network. And according to him, thanks to this new partnership, Ethena will deploy more than $700 million in USDG stablecoin liquidity on Solana. So yeah, this is clearly a good news for Solana. It also showed that there is still intense competition between ecosystems to attract dollars, liquidity, and TVL. That has become one of the most sought after resources in crypto. And one important detail, I mentioned Jupiter Land, which is built on top of the Fluid protocol, but what matters here is that they chose a dedicated instance rather than a broad global market. And that makes sense because we've seen that global lending instances can create problems because users do not necessarily want to be exposed to every possible collateral asset, every token, every risk profile available in a much broader lending environment. Some collateral can be far riskier than others. So here they chose to isolate the system in their own dedicated instance. And this is an approach we have already seen elsewhere. Aave, for example, has also deployed dedicated instance in certain cases. They did it with Lido through a dedicated Aave Lido market. So overall, again, good news for Solana, good news for Jupiterland, and probably positive for Ethena because it should attract more users. That being said, Ethena could technically have done this on many different platforms. They chose Solana most likely because there was some kind of strategic deal behind the scenes. We do not know the details of the deal or if there was a deal. But yeah, I want to add a warning here. Ethena and USDE used to be, in my view, a very interesting product. A synthetic dollar, almost like a stablecoin with a relatively clear model and risk profile that was easy to understand. But now Ethena is gradually taking on more and more risk. And personally, I no longer recommend using USDE purely to chase yield because I do not like the direction this is taking. It is increasingly starting to look like a hedge fund with many different strategies and many different moving parts designed to generate returns rather than simple focused products built around on a clear mechanism. At the beginning, the core strategy was much easier to understand. The carry trade approach was clear. It was easy to understand and it worked really well. But they are moving further and further away from that initial simplicity. And in my opinion, the product is becoming significantly riskier today. That is why I wanted to share with you today on the latest crypto news. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, feel free to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you tomorrow for the next one. Bye bye.